Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is communicate. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way to use the verb communicate is to mean to share or exchange information, news, or ideas. And this sharing can be done verbally, right? So by speaking. It could also be done by writing. When we text, we are communicating. A second way to use the verb communicate is to mean to share an emotion or a feeling in a non-verbal way. So here, we're not speaking, but we might be looking at the way someone is acting or behaving and thinking, well, we know that behavior communicates that the person is angry or sad or whatever other emotion the person may be feeling. A third way that you might hear the verb communicate used is to mean to be able to share and understand each other's thoughts and feelings. So when we are using this particular definition or usage for the verb, we're generally talking about how two people are able to share information and understand each other. But it could also be more than two. If you're referencing maybe a whole family or a team at work, this would apply. A fourth way you might hear the verb communicate used is to mean to pass on an infectious disease to another person. Now, this usage isn't very common. I think it's certainly less common than the first three that we looked at, but I thought during our pandemic, you might have encountered this particular usage, and so I thought I would share it as well. You should know that communicate is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, what I need to do is drop the E and then add ing to form communicating. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding D, since this verb already ends in an E. The base verb, communicate, ends with a T sound, so our ed is going to make an id sound. We're adding an extra syllable. Communicated, communicated. You'll be relieved to know that I don't have any additional meanings to share. You will hear people say communicate with or communicate to. So technically those are phrasal verbs, but the meanings connect back to the ones we've already looked at. So let's practice using our verb of the day in some sample sentences and in different verb tenses. Today we'll practice using the imperative, past perfect, and the simple present. Let's start with the imperative. Remember, this is a command. We are telling someone to do or not to do something. And it is unique in English because there is no stated subject. The subject is implied. It's either you, singular, you as one person, or you, plural, as a group. Okay? So what you're going to see is us beginning our sentence with the base verb. We can always soften these commands or make them seem a little kinder or a little nicer by adding please. We could do that. We could put please at the beginning of the sentence. We could put please at the end of the sentence, but one please is fine. You don't need it at the beginning and the end. So let's take a look at an affirmative example of an imperative sentence with communicate. Communicate your needs before December 15th. This might be a sentence you would hear from someone at work if you're planning something and maybe they're collecting information. So they're telling us, share what you need by this particular date. Okay? Now let's look at making a negative command. So here we're telling someone not to do a particular action. To make the negative imperative sentence, we want to use do not and then the base verb. You'll likely hear native speakers use the contraction form, don't. So here's an example. Don't communicate with your ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend after a breakup. Okay? So if you have experienced dating and breakups, you know sometimes there's that urge to keep talking even though the relationship has ended, and maybe it hasn't ended so well. But a lot of people would say it is healthier if you stop communicating, stop sharing with that person, and get a little space and a little distance. Now let's take a look at the past perfect. To make this verb tense, I'm going to use the past form of have, that's had, and then I'll use the participle form of the verb. And I'm generally using this verb tense to signal that a past event occurred before something else. So let's take a look at an example sentence. The two teams had communicated before the game. So again, the time signal before there helps us indicate, helps signal what happened first. If I want to make a negative past perfect sentence, I'm going to insert not after had. You might hear native speakers use the contraction form hadn't. Let's take a look at an example. His family reported him missing when he hadn't communicated with them for a week. So the thing that happened first was the not communicating. Right? The second event is the report. If I want to make a yes or no question in the past perfect, I'm going to start with had, then I'll have my subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had they communicated with doctors before making a decision? Now let's take a look at the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits and routines. We also use it to express facts. So the thing to remember about the simple present is that if our subject, so the person doing the action, is singular, so one man, one woman, one thing, right? We want to add an S to the end of our verb. So let's look at the example sentence. The teacher communicates with parents weekly. So this is describing a nice habit or routine. So the teacher is going to share information with parents at least once a week. If I had been talking about 2, 3, 4, or more teachers, then I would take the S off the verb and have the sentence, the teachers communicate with parents weekly. So when our subject is they, I, you, or we, we're not adding an S in the affirmative simple present. Now let's take a look at a negative sentence. To make negative simple present, we're going to use do not and the base verb, or does not and the base verb. Here's an example. The IRS doesn't communicate by email. So in case you might be watching this from a place that's not the United States, the IRS is the government agency that collects taxes. And unfortunately, there are many people in this world that try and trick others, and they will create emails that look real and say they are from the IRS and say you haven't paid your taxes. And if you don't pay them by this date, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And they'll say, call this number to make a payment, right? And it's not the IRS, it's just a scammer. So the sentence here is a fact. The IRS here in the United States does not communicate by email. So if you get an email from someone that says they're from the IRS, don't respond, don't give them any money, keep yourself safe. Okay? So lastly, we'll make a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I'm going to start with do or does, then I'll have my subject, and then the base verb. So here's a question. Does your boss communicate well? Right? And so that's going to that third definition about how we share information and understand one another. Now, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb communicate. The first word we're going to look at is the noun communication. This noun can have different meanings, just like our verb can. One possible way to use the noun communication is to mean the sharing or imparting or exchanging of information or news. Here is an example of that usage. Have you been in communication with the new employees? We're kind of asking, have you been sharing information? A second way to use the noun communication is to mean the means of sending or receiving information. So here it could be a reference to phone lines or computers. Or here's another example. The program uses satellite communications. So again, we're describing the way in which information is sent or received. Another noun that's related is communicator. This is a person who is able to convey or exchange information, news, or ideas. And many times we think of communicators as being very skilled in what they're doing and how they're sharing information. I hope to be a gifted communicator one day. So this, that sort of ties into my example sentence there. Isn't she a gifted communicator, right? So isn't she good at conveying or sharing information? The next word we're going to look at is the adjective communicable. You might see the prefix on the end here, able, right? So it ties into the meaning able to be communicated to others. That's one possible definition for this adjective. So an example of that usage, the message must be communicable. So here, maybe the wording is too difficult, the way the message is being shared, people aren't going to be able to understand it. So want it to be able to be shared. A second way to use the adjective communicable ties back to the fourth definition we looked at for our verb. So communicable could be contagious, infectious, or again, in reference usually to a disease, we're talking about something being able to be passed or transmitted from one person to another. Here's an example of that usage. This group of doctors study and treat communicable diseases. The last word we're going to take a look at is communicative. It's an adjective, and it means ready to talk or share information. Here's an example of this usage. Were the people injured in the auto accident communicative? Right? Were they able to talk? Were they able to explain what happened? Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.